imagine we found a culture that was removing the eyeballs of every third child. Okay, would you then agree that we had found a culture that was not perfectly maximizing human well-being? And she said it would depend on why they were doing it. Okay.
What? Welcome back to another Sam Harris reaction video. We're gonna get into this real quick. Please click like and subscribe below. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you find this really interesting, and we're gonna get going right now.
I'll tell you a little story. I was at a conference a few years ago talking about the link between morality and human well-being, as I'm going to tonight. And I said something that I thought would be quite uncontroversial in this context. I said, listen, we know that morality relates to human well-being. We know that human well-being relates to the facts that allow mind to emerge in the brain, and so it's constrained by truth claims in some sense. And therefore we know that certain cultures are wrong about how to maximize human well-being, and therefore they're wrong in terms of what they value. And I cited as an example life for women, especially under the Taliban. It seemed to me their violent misogyny and religious lunacy was a pretty obvious context in which people, especially women, were not thriving. Cool. Now it turns out to denigrate the Taliban at a scientific conference is to court controversy. And so after I spoke, another speaker came up to me and said, well, how could you ever say that the compulsory veiling of women is wrong from the point of view of science? And I said, well, okay, the moment you link questions of right and wrong to questions of human well-being, then it seems pretty clear that forcing half the population to live in cloth bags and beating them or killing them when they try to get out is not a way of maximizing well-being, and therefore not a good practice. And she said, well, that's just your opinion. I said, okay, well, let's just make it easier. Let's imagine we found a culture that was removing the eyeballs of every third child. Okay, would you then agree that we had found a culture that was not perfectly maximizing human well-being? And she said it would depend on why they were doing it. Okay.
What?
So that after I picked my jaw back up off the floor, I said, okay, let's say they're doing it for religious reasons. Let's say they have a scripture which says every third should walk in darkness, or some such nonsense. Okay.
Damn.
And you'll be pleased or horrified to know that she just bit the bullet here and said, then you could never say that they were wrong. Okay. Now this was a woman who has a background in science and philosophy. She's now on the President's Council for Bioethics. She's one of 13 people advising our President on all of the issues related to progress in medicine and life science generally. She had just delivered a totally lucid lecture on the moral implications as she saw them for the use of neuroscience in our courts. She was very worried that we have been developing lie detection technology and that we are using this on captured terrorists. And she viewed this as an invasion of cognitive liberty. Okay, so on the one hand, her moral scruples were really finely calibrated to our own possible missteps, in this case in our war on terror. But she was rather sanguine about the ritual enucleation of children, and it seemed to me terrifyingly detached from the very real suffering of millions of women in Afghanistan at this moment. So this kind of impossible juxtaposition of views is something I'm encountering a lot now among disproportionately well-educated and liberal people. So it's something we have to grapple with. Now the issue for most people is that it has been said over and over again that there's a distinction between facts and values, and that science and rationality generally can only really make truth claims about the former. So science obviously can deal with facts. We have a universe of facts that we can understand to a greater or lesser degree. Facts transcend culture in some basic sense. But it's not that values are another thing entirely. Values are the domain of questions of right and wrong and good and evil, and inconveniently for us, this is the area where the most important questions in human life arise. These are questions like, how should you raise your children? What goals should you strive for in life? What constitutes a good life? And it's thought that science will never be able to tell us the right answers to these questions. Just as science is never going to tell you whether you should like chocolate over vanilla, it's not going to tell you how you should raise your children or treat your neighbor. Now, I think this is an illusion. I think this is quite confused. And it's a dangerous illusion, for as I said, it erodes the conviction of very smart people in the face of really barbaric practices which occasion needless human misery.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I totally understand, like, if you're approaching something from an activist perspective and you see that, like, the Taliban justifies their horrible treatment of people on the basis of religion, and if you're not giving reason adequate the power, if you aren't acknowledging its power, its strengths, its benefits, then you're playing against reason, which plays into religion, which plays into Taliban. So I can see that connection, but I do see how acknowledging that philosophical questions, why questions, how questions, stuff like how should you raise your kids, what goals should you have in life, what does a good life look like, should we be happy in life, is happiness the purpose of life, what is the purpose of life, what is the meaning of life, those kind of questions, they aren't scientific questions at the beginning. First you need a philosophical consideration, right? So the claim, the good life is a happy life. Okay, that's a philosophical claim. Then you can inquire into how to maximize happiness, and then science comes into play at that point. Then you can do research and data, which is guided by the principle that you should be maximizing happiness. There are principles underneath the science there. Or as he said in another video, philosophy is like the womb for science to be born, right? But it's not, I don't think it's denigrating reason, science, and empiricism to say that those questions aren't scientific. They aren't scientific. But you can explore the answers to those questions. You can explore how you would implement the insight from those answers with science. So if the question is, what should your goal in life be? It should be to maximize happiness. If that's your answer, then you can inquire with it scientifically. But the question, how do you maximize happiness, is different than, is the meaning of life to be happy? Different domains, but let's keep going.
We define physics as, loosely speaking, our best effort to understand the behavior of matter and energy in the universe. So it's defined with respect to the goal of understanding how matter is going to behave. Now, anyone else is free to define physics in some other way. I mean, a creationist physicist could come into the room and say, well, that's not my definition of physics. I want my physics, I want to simply match the book of Genesis. And we are free to exclude that person and say, well, you really don't belong at this conference. That's not physics as we are interested in it. You're using the word differently. You're not playing our language game. That gesture of exclusion, in no sense, the fact that the discourse of physics is not sufficient to silence that guy, that person can't be brought into the conversation, doesn't nullify physics as a domain of right and wrong answers. And yet, on the subject of morality, we seem to think that the possibility of differing opinions, the fact that someone can come forward and say, well, no, my morality has nothing to do with human flourishing, it has to do with following, Sharia law. The fact that that position can be articulated, I hear people like Jonathan and certainly many philosophers saying, well, that proves in some sense that there's no there. This is all made up. This is not, we can't, the fact that you can articulate a different position is a problem for the whole field. And I think it's not. So I think we have, obviously we have an intuitive physics, and much of our intuitive physics is wrong. with respect to the goal of understanding how matter and energy are going to behave in the universe.
Right.
What I want to say is that most people, most of us, most cultures have an intuitive morality. And much of our intuitive morality may be wrong with respect to the goal of maximizing human flourishing.
True, true. That was Sam Harris, best comebacks. Hope you guys are enjoying this. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. If you have any requests, I'm open to those. Again, please subscribe and click like below. That would be awesome. It supports the channel a lot. And I'll be back again very soon. Thank you.